Manly Hall official, is glad to produce, publish and offer the message of the great initiates. Filled down through the ages since the beginning of time, great teachers, appointed by the spiritual hierarchies, have come to man to instruct him and reveal to him the next step in his endless path of self-unfoldment. Each of these great messengers have brought a distinct doctrine, and when linked together their teachings form a golden chain of ideals which the human race must aspire to, even though it may not be able to fully realize the end or the way. For the benefit of the student of occult philosophy, we list below 12 great spiritual teachers, many of them now regarded as allegorical rather than historical personages. However, the deep student realizes that mythology is the truest history of the ancient people that we have, and that only in folklore and legend do we find an authentic record of the great light bringers and their messages to man. Hermes. This great Atlantean demigod, probably if not actually the greatest illuminator of mortal man, taught as the key of his philosophy analogy. The relationships existing between the inferior and the superior worlds was the basis of his doctrine, and the knowledge of eusimile was man's first revelation. Hermes is often called the first messenger of God because he is the oldest that we know, and his law of analogical reasoning is the basis of every philosophy of modern times. The essence of his teaching was that God and man were made in the same mold, and that all things in the lower world and the lesser sphere are made after the same pattern as the greater thing in the superior world. He taught that the realization of this was the fundamental principle of wisdom. Orpheus, the Grecian demigod, taught man the law of harmony and the great work of harmonizing the spiritual and material qualities within his own soul. The seven-stringed lyre of Orpheus represents the 7 major rates of vibration known to consciousness at this time. Upon these rates of vibration, which are the basis of form, thought, growth and culture, his philosophy was based, his 7-stringed lyre representing the solar system and the 7 centers in the human body, and upon this he taught man to play the harmony of nature and the music of the spheres. This harmonization of the centers of consciousness was the redemption of the human soul, Eurydice. Krishna, the great Indian Christ and the most beloved deity of Brahman theology, is said to have had love as the keynote of his teaching. He taught man of the love of God for his creations, the love of the spirit within for its bodies, and the love existing always between the spiritual and the human. He taught man to live in peace with his neighbor and to recognize the fundamental duty of regard and respect for all other created things. Krishna, the Christ child of India, is symbolical of the sun who is in love with Radha, East Indian symbol of nature. The marriage of the sun to nature and the love of God for his outpourings was the center ground of his divine message to man. He taught immortality and the non-existence of death, that ignorance was the basis of oblivion, and that those who love only the light would never be in darkness. Buddha, the world's most eminent reformer and regenerator of ideals, brought mankind the doctrine of renunciation and non-attachment as the basis of immortality. He told man to renounce the temporal for the eternal, the illusion for the reality, the lower for the higher, and the outer for the inner. He taught that attachment was the basis of sorrow and that freedom from attachment was the basis of peace. Upon his doctrines has been based the greatest religion upon the earth at the present time, a creed which has influenced the destiny of half-full people of the earth. If you're enjoying this video and finding value in the content, we kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel. A large portion of our listeners and viewers haven't subscribed yet, and by doing so, you'll help us grow and continue bringing you more high-quality audiobooks. Your support means a lot to us, and it's just one click away. So, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to stay connected and never miss out on our latest releases. Muhammad. The essence of the faith of Islam is the necessity for obedience and man's perfect willingness to leave his destiny in the hands of the immortal. Muhammad taught that the greatest glory was for him who obeyed the laws rather than for one who creates a law, that those who leave their destiny with the powers of the divine and follow those laws in simplicity and trust, obeying them to the letter, shall never want for the treasures of the eternal. Moses taught the children of Israel and the ancient world the omnipotence of law, the justice without mercy of law, the impersonality of law, and that those who would break law are themselves broken upon it. He delivered the tablets of the 10 laws to the children of Israel, teaching them that law is the voice of God and that those who keep his laws are the ones he blesses and preserves. Zoroaster, the great founder of the faith of the Parsis and the Fire King of Persia, taught the doctrine of light and said that the sun and flame were the most precious things in the universe. He taught the building of that fire within the soul of the individual, that the fire that burns in man is the eldest of all ohms, that man is dependent upon fire and that this fire is the divine essence of God within himself. In other and simpler words, he taught the indwelling presence of the divine. Confucius, the great unapothecized saint of China, a god made so by the love of his people, taught that morality was true, greatest of all virtues and the most acceptable quality in the universe, that the salvation of man depended upon his relationships to his fellow creatures, that purity, chastity and fraternity were the greatest of all qualities, and that religion in essence rested upon practical works rather than theoretical dogmas. Plato's doctrines were based upon the principles of logic, and he taught his disciples the orderly creation, the logical creation and the reasonable in the universe. He taught a geometrical base of all growth and instructed his followers that the universe, God, man, and nature are mathematical units capable of exact analysis. Odin. This great initiate who illuminated Scandinavian and the Teutonic tribes, had as the basis of his teaching the doctrine of courage. He taught the necessity of stamina and daring, that those who aspired to reach the footstool of light must dare all things, must battle against all opposition, and that reward comes to the victor in the battle and not to the one who remains at home. Hiram Mahif, the great Masonic idol and ideal, taught in his unspoken life the doctrine of human regeneration. Hiram, representing the spiritual essences in the human body, redeems himself and is redeemed through the path of the Masonic mysteries. Only in transmutation lays the path of immortality, and every human quality must be transmuted into a divine and eternal thing. Jesus. The one teacher who is best known to the Christian world, but whose doctrines are the least understood of any of the great world teachers, is the Master Jesus. The key to his philosophy is brotherhood, and his ideal was a new faith built out of the mutual understanding and common interests of all of the others. He sought to unite all wisdom into one simple creed and also sought to show man the one simple labor which all creation is trying to achieve, each in its different way. Only those who have found harmony and are living in a state of brotherhood with other living things will ever know the message of the Master Jesus, for he synthesizes the previous world religions for those who have the eyes to recognize that fact. These qualities, if you will analyze them closely, you will find are absolutely dependent one upon another. There has never been a complete revelation up to date, but all the revelations of the past gathered together build a monumental temple which is the expression of all known wisdom. This is the temple whose door is open to the student of the wisdom religion when he has learned to forsake dogma and creed, worship God in spirit and in truth rather than in clan and group. The message of the wisdom teachings to the modern world is, briefly, one of impartiality in which the student worships God in his manifold expressions rather than his own crystallized concept of divinity which has so long been the basis of his faith. Only in the universal realization of the one truth, the one light, the one path, can the student hope to make progress. The light bearers are incidents and can receive our respect and veneration, but the light is the thing which we should worship and not the one who brings it. The Temple of Sin. In the heart of Mongolia, that unknown land of magic and sorcery, stands a strange building, pagoda-like in structure and painted red and yellow. It is concealed in the wastes of a mighty range of mountains where white men seldom travel and exists as only a myth even to the natives themselves. From the comers of this grotesque building hang strange lanterns of bamboo and silk, bearing upon them oriental designs and crude Chinese characters. A great flight of granite steps leads sheer up from the valley below, winding between the great pillars that form the gate and at last ending in a lattice-work door gloriously carved and lacquered in dragons and strange birds. On either side of the gate of this lonely temple stands a great dog made of wondrously colored porcelain. And on the base of each pillar where they stand is written one word. The dog upon the right carries the name Mirth and the one on the left Wrath. For many years these two animals, with their shiny porcelain bodies and heads maned like lions, their sharp gleaming teeth and great staring eyes, have stood guard at the entrance to the Temple of Sin, one of the strangest of the mysterious remnants of forgotten ages. This temple is served and upheld by a small group of priests who stand firmly among the tottering creeds of ancient days, guarding with fanatical faith this temple built by the hands of the gods to mark the place where the first man sinned on earth. The high priest of this temple is a strange character whom you must become better acquainted with. A tall, gaunt Chinaman of angular and sinister frame. Dressed in robes of yellow broadcloth ornately brocaded with flowers and trimmed with a crimson border, he wears upon his back a great Chinese symbol which means, when translated, immortality forever, and upon the chest of his garment another which says mortality unbroken. No one knows the age of this Chinese priest, but legend says it can be counted in hundreds of years, and as you look at his wizened face, dried, seamed and browned, you can well believe that he really is as old as those barren mountains and withered lands that surround the temple. They say that this spot is shunned like death, for since the beginning of time it was only meant to be visited by the sinners of the world. The old Chinaman, with his hands crossed in his sleeves, was walking softly up and down behind the lattice work of hand-carved teak gilded with lilies and wondrous chrysanthemums. A faint odor of incense was borne outward by the gentle breeze, filling the air with the pungent aroma of burning sandy wood, while now and then the dull boom of a temple gong told that the services of the gods were not forgotten and that the priests were gathered to pray. Suddenly the old man held up a long finger, its nail encrusted with gold and curling some 6 inches beyond the fingertip. His wizened slanty eyes open widely, and their whites, long yellowed with age, shone out like pines of amber. "Someone is coming over the pass of death," he whispered, pointing to the hills which surrounded the little vale in which the temple stood. As he spoke, the priests in the yellow robes gathered around him and looked where his finger pointed. And true enough, a thin line of dark forms could be seen in the distance, winding in and out among the hills. The aged Oriental looked long and earnestly, and his old eyes seemed to gaze far beyond the mountain tops. "He is a white man," he said after a while, "and he comes with a pack train. He is seeking rugs, rare silks, and precious curios. Beware, lest he rob the temple. Close all the doors save one, and let the dogs of porcelain watch his passing." The monks bowed silently and, folding their hands in their sleeves, vanished like shadows in the temple passageway. The old priest, upon his head a helmet of gold hung with tinkling bells and jangling ornaments, turned and entered the shrine room. Passing over the floor, soft with furs and precious rugs, he opened the doors of a tiny shrine, and there before him, clasped in the claws of a teakwood dragon, stood a tiny mirror. It shone and gleamed with a depth less light, and in its burnished surface were reflected the many little flames of oil that burned in sockets on the wall. The old priest hunched his back, and his queue, braided with silken cords, fell over on a shoulder. "O mirror of Kwang Ku, creator of all that is, first being of all earth, there comes one over yonder desert whom my soul whispers is seeking to desecrate thy shrine." He raised his thumb, which bore upon it a great ring of jade, and closing the doors placed upon the crack where they joined a soft wax pellet upon which he stamped the signet of the emperor by means of the thumb ring. "By the jade of the first dynasty, may the Emperor of Gods protect the shrine of this sacred mirror. May the 5-clawed dragon twine himself around this altar that the defiler may not enter, for it is not the will of the gods that the mirror of sin shall be stolen." Then turning, he passed from the room as silently as a yellow specter and out into the courtyard of the temple. At about the same time, Hank Nicholson, buyer and importer representing one of our largest Fifth Avenue stores, put his foot on the lowest step of the temple. Hank Nicholson was a bad man, but he always thought he was worse than anyone else did. He undipped his revolver holster and with a hitch of his belt headed up the steps towards the porcelain dogs, one of which grinned while the other leered in stony salutation. Hank spoke fairly good Chinese in several dialects and soon made himself understood. "I'm looking for rugs and curios, any good teakwood, ivory, hammered brass, or idols that you may have around. Sabby?" Hank held up a string of Chinese money and shook it under the nose of the aged Oriental. The Chinaman, in whose eyes was a strange glint, kept perfectly poised as he gazed into the flat face in front of him and surveyed the stock of red hair that was Hank's crowning glory. He then spoke slowly, "His is no place of merchandise, of gold or silver, or of ivory. This is the temple of a true God and has been known for ages as the chapel of the first sin. Here I live with a small group of priests, having no intercourse with the word of men. There is no use your seeking here, for I have nothing to harder. to buy or to sell. I am a servant of God and not a silversmith." "Ah, bosh and nonsense," exclaimed Hank. "I've heard that before. How many yens for the whole damn temple and everything it except you? I'm looking for antiques and curios, but don't want anything as funny as you. Come on, Chinky, move aside and let's see what you got." The Oriental bowed patiently and, stepping to one side, allowed the exponent of Brooklyn diplomacy to enter. Hank stood in the inner doorway, arms akimbo, and viewed the surroundings with an air of complacency. "I'll get $500,000 for this on Broadway," he announced confidently. "How much, Chinky?" "I have told you, white man, I have nothing to sell." Hank pressed with his toe against a rug before him. "That's a fine rug. Chinky, looks like a piece of genuine Thibet silk. You've got some good teakwood here too. I'll have some of my men come right in and pack it up." The Chinaman bowed with great servility, but there was a wicked glint in his beady black eyes. "I must remind the white man of what's said before. This is a temple of God and not a curio store. God will defend his temple." The American laughed. "A fine bunch of gods you got, Chinky. Own 3 of them that I took for bootjacks in Brooklyn, and they haven't answered me back yet. Don't get sentimental with your religion now, because when Hank Nicholson wants something he gets it, see?" And Hank pulled out his revolver and nestled it against the Chinaman's short ribs. The Oriental looked down mildly on the gun and replied, "3 times have I enjoyed white man's civility, and alas, it has always been the same. The first white man I entertained stole my jades, the second robbed me of my temple maiden, and you, honorable sir, would take the building and all. I fear you must come to China and learn manners." Hank stood nonplussed for a moment and then turned back to look at the room. Gazing around, his eye rested upon the shrine bearing on its closed doors the seal of wax. "What's that?" he demanded. "In yonder shrine," answered the Chinaman, "is your mirror of sin made upon the eyeball of the god of light. It is the most precious thing in all China and rests in the claws of the sacred dragon. Those who have suffered great agony come from all parts of the world to pay homage to this mirror, for as they gaze into its depths they can see the reason for their suffering, and they know the sins for which they are accursed. So they come to pay homage to its shrine." "Oh," said Hank's mirror, "with a story like that would bring $10,000 on Broadway." "I do not know what your wide avenue is," answered the Chinaman, "but if it be a place, the mirror shall not rest there. In my hands I carry the temple gong. If you do not leave this holy place at once, I shall ring for my priests, and if so order them, they will slay you where you stand and cut you into as many pieces as yon chrysanthemum has petals." Recognizing the flint in the old man's voice, Hank decided discretion was the better part of valor, so he passed silently down the steps and out of the temple. But in his mind a plan was formulating. A plan such as that thrilled the hearts, if practiced, I ever robbed, developed by Western civilization. Drawing off a little distance, the American camped and the coolies unpacked their burdens. As evening fell and shrouded the temple with its mystic lattice work, a tiny gleaming spark a few hundred feet away marked the resting place of Hank Nicholson, buyer, and his pack train. Slowly the monks filed out of the temple and into the little huts among the rocks where they slept and prayed. And lastly the old priest, swinging together the temple grating, passed also like a phantom from the shrine. There was no moon that night, but stars shone down and lighted the earth with a million fires. As the chill blast told of coming dawn, Hank unrolled his blanket and in the darkness crept across the sand among the rocks towards the gate of the Temple of Sin. The two porcelain dogs looked down in silence as he passed between them and stood before the hand-carved wooden grating. An ancient Chinese lock protected the door, but this he quickly opened and passed as silently as a ghost into the inner shrine. The little oil lamp still lighted the room dimly. With an expression of diabolical greed on his face, Hank rolled up rug after rug and his itching fingers played lovingly over the rare porcelains and carvings. At last his eye rested on the shrine and something irresistible drew him over towards it. "So the old Chinaman says," muttered Hank, "that whoever looks into that mirror shall see pass before him all the sins he ever committed. That's a fine story, but I'll wager it won't show up some of the little private affairs of my life." He looked at the seal of wax for several seconds, and then taking hold of the two lower handles drew open the door, breaking the seal. In the alcove stood the mirror, a gleaming mother of pearl held between the claws of the great dragon like some diamond in a Tiffany setting. A pale glow radiated from it, and the American gazed into the depths of its surface in spite of himself. As he did so, he shrank back in amazement. Scene was unrolling itself before him. It was a lonely hill covered with clouds and seemed deep beneath the weight of approaching storms. As he watched, he saw himself. He was dressed in the yellow armor of bygone days, and there swung from his shoulder a cape upon which was stamped the signet of Rome. He stood leaning upon a spear with his helmet hanging by a leathern thong from his arm. As he stood there, a rift broke in the clouds, and at his feet lay the shadow of a cross. Suddenly Hank Nicholson gave a scream and, covering his eyes with his hands, dashed madly from the room, howling like a madman. "No! No, God, not that!" And his hurrying footsteps sounded on the steps of the temple walk while the grated door closed silently behind him. From the gloom which bordered the edge of the room there emerged a silent figure, his hands clasped in the sleeves of his coat. The old Chinaman's eyes followed the American as he dashed from the room, and then kneeling before the mirror he muttered, "None there are who can gaze into the mirror of sin unafraid. None can desecrate the holy temple of God and escape." From out the night a great moaning howl broke the stillness, the cry of a great dog sounding weirdly and eerily in the stillness. With it came a scream of mortal agony, and then all was silent. The priest, carrying a little oil lamp in his hand, passed out from under the gates of the temple, and a gleaming light reflected itself from the great porcelain dogs that guarded the temple steps. He suddenly stepped back in amaze. Hanging in the air, clenched between the teeth of the porcelain dog who was called Wrath, was the figure of the American buyer. And there it remained until the vultures came. None knew how it happened to be there, held tightly by the great fangs of the image, but to this day they tell the story. And the great dog with the red blood stains upon its mouth and teeth still stands as the silent guardian at the gate of the Temple of Sin. The Emerald Tablet. Camels, bearing upon their backs varicolored howdahs, were coming swiftly over the yellow sand, the occupants of the swaying platforms shaded from the hot desert sun by curtains and networks of silk and wool. One of these mighty desert ships was a gigantic black dromedary, while the other was a tan-colored camel much smaller than his companion. Seated all the great black Nubian was a strange figure, a slender yet fierce-looking man of 45 or 50 years of age, his face swarthy and tanned by the desert sun and its lines accentuated by a jet-black beard which forked in neatly trimmed points. Over his head was a fold of white cloth held in place by a twisted band of many-colored cords. He was robed from head to foot in white save for his boots, which protruded as tips of red leather as he sat cross-legged upon the cushions. Thrust into his wide, white sash was a scimitar of pure Damascus steel, while a long Arab rifle inlaid with mother-of-pearl and gold swung at his side, its long barrel protruding far over the side of the camel. Seldom has such an animal appeared before the world as that great black dromedary. Its short glossy hair seemed to shine with the sheen of the desert sun, and it was draped from head to tail in cords and bangles, many of the purest gold. The driving reins were fringed with tinkling tassels of metal, and the stately beast placed its feet upon the sand with a slow, methodical dignity which was uncommon even in a land where dignity and grace predominate. At the very top of the howdah gleamed a star of solid gold, from which streamed the many-colored awnings which hung downward in trappings nearly to the ground. Altogether, in a land of picturesque people, this figure stood out in splendor and glory. His companion, on the other hand, was as simply mounted and aired as one could imagine. Plainness and simplicity marked him as again an extreme in the land of extremes. His camel was about as good as the average, its trappings were few, and its rider was unarmed and of a different race from his companion. His skin was white, and two blue eyes shone out from a face chiseled like that of a Greek god, and locks of shiny brown hair hung upon his forehead. He was dressed in a simple, white robe, and his feet were sandaled in leathern thongs. His eyes and head were also shaded rolled the sun by a canopy, but the plain awnings showed no decoration, and he guided his beast with a simple braided cord. Slowly the two great beasts, carrying their so varied burdens, mounted a great rolling dune, and before them, as far as the eye could reach, stretched an endless waste of desert sand. Far off in the blue haze it seemed that strange mountains rose in purple and gray, but of living thing or growing shrub there was no sign as far as the eye could command. "Where are we bound, master?" asked the brown-haired youth, turning to the mighty figure that towered above him on the back of the dromedary. The swarthy-faced companion pointed his finger, studded with rings of gold and silver, out into the deep haze of the desert. "There," he answered in a voice deep and yet strangely mellow and inspiring. The youth gazed in the direction that the other pointed, but saw only a vague haze resting on the desert. "What is that place?" he asked. "That," came the answer, "is the land of the mirage, where there still floats in the ethers the temples of races long gone by, where great seas of water lure the dying traveler to his end only to vanish again in the limitless horizon. There across the sky wandered caravans who passed this way before the silent kings were laid to rest in their tombs along the Nile. Still in the floating lights they pass, gleaming and twisting in the ethers. There stands also that wondrous building amidst whose domed arches and lofty pillars is hidden the knowledge that you have come to seek, for in that shining place are the lost libraries of the dead, and we are now passing along El Way, where once the caravans wound out of Egypt, carrying with them the papyrus scrolls, the Chaldee tablets and the Phoenician stones, bringing them to this their present resting place. Here stand today the terracotta cylinders of Baby On, the history of lost races, the accounts of empires now unknown. From the western land you have come, properly recommended to seek these treasures of an ancient people, and I have come from the city of the mirage to take you to them. Come." And with a word to the dromedary, who seemed to understand his every word, the strange figure forged ahead, swinging and swaying in his moving palanquin as though he were in a small boat on a stormy sea. The youth urged his camel forward also, and as the hours passed they moved with a rapid pace over the sand dunes into the heart of the desert from whence no man has ever come alive. Suddenly the figure on the great black dromedary raised his hand, and the intelligent creature stopped as though it had read its master's thoughts. The youth drew up alongside and ate also and gazed out into the haze of the desert. As he looked he saw forming out of the mist a strange city of marble and sandstone. Great obelisks carved in birds and beasts rose from amid groves of ancient palms whose branches swayed as though by a gentle wind. Mighty arches, hearing upon their beams the sun globe with his many wings, appeared strange shimmering lights amid the haze that filled the desert air. Slowly the sand before them changed into sparkling water with wondrous boats carved like birds and swans floating upon it. The papyrus with its bushy heads grew from the marshes on its shore, and great herons with their crimson breasts stood like statues in the shallow places. Before them stretched a great avenue of sphinxes with the water lap ping at the feel of their pedestals, and in the distance rose the plumed pillars of a mighty temple such as that whose ruins still stand like gaunt skeletons at Karnak. Fleecy white clouds seemed to it in the ethers, and a scene of wondrous beauty took the place of the air and hillies until flamed the gates of the ancient city. Over the bridges across the water, great caravans were passing to and from. Gloriously robed figures on Arabian stallions dashed in and out, heavily laden donkeys and oxen plodded beneath their weighty loads, streams of camels, gloriously caparisoned, carried riders to and from an endless train vanished among the hills. Now and then a great elephant, carrying on its hack a gilded tower, passed slowly by, its tusks inlaid with gold and its great smooth body painted in colored pigments. Once a chariot dashed through the street with cruel curved sword blades upon its wheel to cut and destroy all who stayed its progress. The youth gazed at the scene in amazement, for such a thing this has not been in the world for thousands of years. "Is this all an illusion?" he gasped. "No," answered the guide, as he rested his arm on the long barrel of his gun. "This is part of the mystery of Akasha, in whose subtle essences lives eternal all things that have ever been. This great city of living light, this dream palace of the past, floats all over the surface of the earth and the ever-changing ethers of nature. These are the mirages of the desert, and as the eyes of men grow dim from gazing at the shining sand, and the life is slowly burned away by the blazing desert sun, these visions come to him boding on the endless horizons and lure him on to drink of water which lips can never taste, to rest in shade which can never shelter the body. For as you come nearer to this city it sinks away, and though you followed it to the ends of earth you could never reach it. But come, I have been appointed out of this city to show you things which you have come across the world to see. I am a mirage like the rest, for I belong to a race that is no more. You see me with the eyes of a dying man, you see me with the senses of the shadow. But here, let us pass over the bridge and into a citadel that was a ruin 5,000 years before the coming of your Christ." They urged forward their steeds, but instead of the city vanishing, they mounted upon the arched bridge and passed slowly across into the city of the mirage. They were in the same sort of hustling town which dots the Orient today: tiny shops and narrow streets, laughing people and busy tradesmen. The grim mystery lay in the fact that all these things were shadows, unreal and non-existing. The life which sold the wares or bartered for the merchandise had left those labors ages before. But still in the ethers it bought and sold, gave and exchanged the wondrous rugs of Baghdad, the steel swords of Damascus, and the glorious papyrus scrolls of the Nile. The makers of perfume dispensed their sweet-scented wares, and the gold and silver smiths hammered their metals, and the priest in his pleated robes walked along the ruffled streets deeply grooved by the wheels of passing chariots. All in the mist, all in a world that can never be again. The strange guide led the youth through all these streets and byways, where howling dogs and yelping curs sought to stay their way, where little red children played among the rutted cobblestones, where flashing color and deepest the mingled in true Oriental cosmopolitanism. Then before them rose a temple, not with the domed minarets of the Turk or the fluted columns of Greece, but a great temple of angles and squares. Its dome was a many-sided pyramid, and a path of obelisks and banners upon poles of cypress lined the way. Great gates of bronze confronted the wanderers, at the side of which was a mighty wheel to be turned by 10 slaves that they might open. Upon the surface of the temple was carved strange figures, painted with pigments drawn from human blood, which last eternal because of their subtle qualities: figures of gods and goddesses, winged globes, and fiery demons, carved by the two-dimensional eye of Egypt's ancient artisans. All these confronted the wanderers as they pressed forward into a city of the dead. "What is this?" asked the youth. "This is the temple of the three fires, the shrine of the thrice majestat, thoth Hermes Mercurius, the king of heaven, earth and heaven," answered the white-robed guide as his camel knelt beside the steps. Slipping gracefully from the cushions, he held out his hand, and the beast vanished as though it had never been. "See," he said, turning to the youth, "part of the mirage has already left. The rest will follow when its work is done." The brown-haired man descended, but more awkwardly, from his camel and followed the figure that mounted the stair, rutted by the footsteps of the faithful. Drawing his mighty scimitar, the Egyptian pounded with it upon the brazen gate, which echoed and re-echoed as though it were a hell of solid gold. Slowly the great gates parted, and the youth watched 10 Nubian slaves turning the mighty fulcrum, their clanking chains echoing in rhythm with the falling cogs. Beckoning the youth to enter, the older man stepped in after him, and the gate swung to again. The visitor found himself in the strangest room that he had ever seen, stranger far than even his dreams could have created: a great amphitheater of feathered papyrus columns, each one carved with the face of a god. Far up near the ceiling hummed 12 ethereal fires that sent ghastly shadows in and out, causing the stone eyes of the gods to blink as though in life. The roof of the temple, great slabs of solid sandstone tinted to the blue of the sky, was covered with suns, moons and stars and the planets of our chain, which seemed to twist and revolve like living things. Before them sat a mighty figure, upon its head a crown of lunar crescents. Like the Memnons of the desert, it rose to a colossal height, sitting upon a throne of Alexandrian marble. Upon its throne was the uraeus of serpents, and in one hand the book of the breaths of life, while in the other was the Croyan cedar, the promise of Egyptian immortality. Between its feet was a door leading into some unknown and mystic vault. Of living occupant there was no sign in this mighty room of gloom and shadow, but as they stood there a strange chant broke the silence as of many voices singing together, "Glory, glory, glory, mighty Lord of the seven lights. Glory, glory, glory. Osiris, Prince Hegon of the earth. O child of the hawk, glory, glory, glory. O Isis, mother of nature. Glory, glory, glory. O Isis, keeper of the seals, mother of creation. Goddess of the Nile. Glory be to thee." As this chant sounded, a dull glow lighted the mighty statue, which proved to be that of Isis, the mother goddess of the ancients. Around the statue dim forms kept circling like monster vampire hats, and the guide turned to his companion and whispered, "These are the griffins and the demons who stand as watchful sentinels over the sacred things. You are in your temple of the Mother of Mysteries, Isis the Virgin of Heaven. Come." They pressed forward together, and reaching the little door at the base of the statue they passed in through a veil of fine silk, which parted at their coming, and entered into a mighty room shaped as a cube, bare of all famishing its endless evenness, broken only by the joints of the stones. A door of granite closed behind them, and they were in a living cube of solid stone. The guide raised his copper-colored hand, and, pointing one finger to heaven and with the other hand to the earth, said solemnly, "Behold, the measure of a man." The youth did not understand. Hut gazed around him in awe and amazement. "Where am I?" he asked. "You are the Holy of Holies, the secret chamber of Lilt thrice Magistar, the Lord of Light and the threefold essence of the flame. Beneath your feet is a chamber the depth of which no man may know. In that rock-hewn chamber are hidden the glories of the world. Far above your head rises a mighty pyramid upon whose crest burns the fire eternal." He looked three little objects from the folds of his robe and, tossing them upon the ground, said, "Behold, the keys of wisdom." The youth looked and saw three tiny geometrical forms of some precious stone shining at his feet. The first was a little green cube, the second a little red pyramid, the third a transparent shining globe of translucent whiteness. "Behold the scepters of the king and the key to the riddle of the universe," said the white-robed man as he pointed to the strange forms. "But now I will show you the mystery of them all, the pact that was made of God to man, in which the spirit of Hermes Mercurius is tied forever to the soul of man. Behold!" As he spoke he faced the western side of the temple, and as he did so the great central stones broke away and, sliding out upon runners of solid granite hung suspended in the air, left a great opening some 10 feet square upon the surface of the walls. In this great opening hung a stone of the most clear and brilliant green. It gleamed, glowed and glistened until it was surrounded by flames that seemed to light the darkest corners of the recess. It was suspended from the four corners of the aperture by golden cabins, and was set in a massive setting of gold and jewels. The great tablet was nearly square, and upon it in letters of green fire were traced many lines of strange characters in a language long forgot. "And what is this?" whispered the youth, howling in awe before the living stone. "This sacred thing that you look upon," answered his guide as the room grew green with the light, "is the tabula emeraldine. The emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, the oldest sage in the world and God's first revelation to man." "What does it say in those strange letters?" asked the youth eagerly. "Read," answered the stranger as he pointed back to the stone. As the youth gazed, he seemed to remember something somewhere, sometime. He had known that language. Slowly, as it became dear to him, these words shone out in green fire and etched themselves into his very soul. "Behold, the secret work of Hermes Trismegistus, one in essence but three in aspect, the work of Mercurius, the universal agent and nameless power, one in spirit but three in expression. This it is true, this is no lie, it is certain and to be depended upon. The superior above agrees with the inferior below, and the inferior below agrees with the superior above. Know this to effect the one true and perfect work, as all things owe their existence to the will of one thing, so all things have their origin out of one thing. The father of that thing is the sun, its mother the moon, the wind carried it in its wings, and its nurse is the spiritual earth. Only one thing, after God, is the father of all things of this universe and those to come. Its power is perfect and to everlasting end after it is one with the spiritual earth. But you must separate the spiritual earth from the dense or crude dirt by means of this gentle flame with great attention. Then it ascends from the earth up into heaven and descends again newborn as dew upon the earth. And the superior and the inferior are increased to greater power by the dew of life. By this thou wilt partake of the honors of the whole world, and darkness and ignorance shall fly from thee. This is the strength of all power, with this art thou the master of all things, with power to transmute all that is fine such as gold and all that is coarse such as metals. In this manner the world was created. The arrangements to follow this road are hidden. For this reason I am called Mercurius. Mescasol. One in spirit, hot threefold in manifestation. In my Trinity is hidden the wisdom of the whole world. I have spoken, and it is ended now that which I have said concerning the effect of the sun. Thus in death the tabula smeridina of Hermes Trismegistus. The lights gleamed and glowed upon the emerald, and the youth stood gazing in awe and admiration. Suddenly the silence was broken by a noise like a clap of thunder, and a great shadowy form hovered in the alcove. On its head it wore the head of an ibis, the sacred bird of Hermes, and in its hand it carried a tablet and a style. For a moment it stood like a phantom shadow. The room swayed and twisted and turned. The mighty rocks creaked and splintered, and a great darkness fell upon the earth. The youth staggered and reeled in the darkness, which grew heavier and heavier about him. Then a voice sounded low in his ear, the voice of his guide. "Behold the city of the mirage, for it is vanishing in the desert air. Somewhere upon the face of the earth it will ever he, and now it is passing over your land and the home of your birth. I cannot come with you, for I am part of the great illusion, but you have seen, remember that which you have seen." A mighty crash shook the air, and the youth felt himself falling. He struck something and rolled over, and with a crash the light broke upon him. He was sitting in the middle of the floor in his own little room, and in his hand was an ancient book on the mysteries of Hermes, which he had bought in a bookstore the day before. The sun was shining cheerily through the window as he rose sheepishly to his feet, realizing with a certain feeling of disgust that he had just fallen out of bed. he still tells the story of his adventure, and one never knows just what to believe. Think it over for yourself. To the Astrological Physicians of England. A selection taken from the rare writing, Semiotica Uranica, dated London. Dear souls, to you all, and to you especially that heard these lectures, do I dedicate them, and present them to you, not to look upon only, for then I had as good have sent you a picture, and as much it would have pleased your eye. Man was made not only for speculation, but also for practice. Speculation brings only pleasure to a man's self, it's practice which benefits others. And I hope I need not tell you that man was not born for himself alone. These rules will serve, if heedfully observed by the eye of reason, to balance your judgment in sailing through the prognostics part of physique, that so you may steer your course by the cart of truth, and not boat unsettled by upon the waves of error, ignorance, or opinion. To you, rather than to any that I know, belongs the practice of physique, and that practice may be perfect. Judgment ought to be sound, and to make judgment sound, is required an exquisite knowledge. Judgment is perfected by knowledge, knowledge by experience, whence it appears, that the more communicative knowledge is so much the more excellent it is. Of all the men in the world, I hate a drone most, that sucks the sweetness of other men's labors, but doth no good himself, and will as soon teach physique or astrology to an oak as to a creature the center of whose actions is terminated in himself. Surely, if God had not made the nature of man communicative, he would not have made one man to stand in continual need of another, but we see the contrary, and the sons of wisdom know how to pick out the meaning of God from it. I have given you here all my prognostications from the decumature of the sick party, and although I ingenuously confess the greatest part of them will hold true in a hoary question erected upon the fight of the urine, of which I have now added a compendious treatise, yet this is my judgment at present, that next the nativity, the decumature is the safest and surest ground for you to build your judgment upon, and you shall always find it by experience. Excellent and true was that motto of Hermes Trismegistus, quod est superius, est sicut inferius, and this will appear to the eye of every one that deserves tile name of reasonable man, if he do but consider, that his body is made of the same materials that the whole universe is made of, though not in the same form, namely, of a composition of contrary elements. There is scarce a man breathing that knows his right hand from his left, but knows that if you set bottles of hot water to a man's feet it will make his head sweat, and the reason is, the mutual harmony of one part of tile body with another. Why then should not the actions of one part of the creation produce as well effects in another, that being also one entire body, composed of the same elements, and in as great harmony? What's the reason that a man will do more for his brother than he will for a stranger? Is it not because he is formed by the blood of the same mother, and begotten by the seed of the same father? Why then should not the celestial bodies act upon the terrestrial, they being made of the same matter, and by the finger of the same God? He that will not believe reason, let him believe experience. He that will believe neither, is little better than an infidel. I confess this way of judicature hath been desired by many, promised by some, but hitherto performed by none, which was the motive cause I then took the task in hand myself, which have now enlarged. In performing whereof, in many places I corrected the failings of my author. What was frivolous I left other, being unwilling to blot paper and trouble your brains with impertinencies. Where he was too large I abbreviated him, and where he was deficient I supplied him both with precept and example. If there be any failings, consider. Nemo sine crimen vivit. That man never breathed yet, nor never shall, that did all well, and had no fault at all. My failings, if any be, were not intentional but accidental. Together with this astrological judgment, I have also given you the judgment of Hippocrates and others. The rules whereof are drawn from the person of the sick, which although they have been often printed before, yet I have compared them with the original copy, and brought them into a plainer method so that you may desire at one single ingress. If you make use of both these ways together in judgment of the disease, without a miracle you can hardly fail. If any find fault with the shortness of my rules, let them learn to walk worthy of those they have first. Their own experience will bring them more. He's but an apish physician that builds all his practice upon other men's foundations. Man was born to look after knowledge, and in this particular you are set in the way how to find it, by one that desires to be a friend to all honest and ingenious arts. Thus have you what I have done, and you know for whose sakes I did it. What now remains, but that you labor with might and main for your own good, and the increase of your own knowledge to make experience of them? For as the diligent hand mocketh rich, so the diligent mind increased knowledge, and for my own particular, never fear, but during the time I am amongst the living I shall never cease to do you good in what I may or can. Spitalfields next door to the Red Lion. Copyright 2025 by Manly Hall Official. Thank you for listening. Please consider to subscribe, like, and share to help the channel growth. New videos on a daily basis.